that Hurricane Hugo hit the island of Puerto Rico. Hugo was not as devastating as Maria, but the eastern part of the island really got hammered. And still within months after Hugo, you could see the forest responding. You could see the forest recovering. So I think that's where I found this connection that Joel mentioned to become a disturbance ecologist. So I study hurricanes, I study fires, I wrote one paper on volcanoes, and I study exotic invasions, and I study bulldozers and the impact that they have on ecosystems. I want to understand how ecosystems adapt to disturbances, how what we as humans do is similar to or different from what the species we share our landscapes with have experienced through evolutionary time. So here in Florida, I worked on 2 hurricanes, Charlie and Irma. Who was here in 2004 when Charlie hit? Okay, not too much of us, but we'll come back to that. Charlie hit my 8th year in Florida. And I was convinced then that the threats to heaven on earth in Southwest Florida were population growth and uncontrolled development. That growth would stop if we could get rid of mosquito control, or get rid of air conditioning, or have a Category 3 hurricane. And Charlie, right before it made landfall, switched over to Category 4, and the growth didn't even slow down. Charlie was the first major hurricane to impact this part of the state since Hurricane Donna in 1960. So what I saw as a disturbance ecologist was this renewed interest in what are hurricanes, particularly with the probability that they'd be increasing in frequency and intensity. Lenore Tedesco from the University of Indiana came to town to talk about her work in Hurricane Andrew, and at the end of her talk, somebody from the audience said to her, asked this question, "I live in Cape Coral. What should I do to protect my home from a hurricane?" And Lenore answered, "How much do you want to spend to re-engineer nature?" And gave a good dramatic pause and said, "It won't be enough." So the city of Cape Coral is spread out over 65,000 acres with over 400 miles of canals. More canals than any other city anywhere, I think, at least on Earth. I don't know about cities elsewhere. As of last year's census, it's home to over 200,000 people, 30% growth since the last census in 2010. The Cape saw its first homes built in 1958, just a few months before I was born. The Gulf America Corporation originally purchased a little over 100 square miles of land for less than $700,000. Now it sounds like a lot, but it breaks down to about $10 an acre. Who was here for Irma? Okay, who stayed here for Irma? Yeah, that's different, right? Because you got good warning and a lot of us left. Karen and I and our 2 dogs and our cat slept in room 111 of Whitaker Hall during the storm because I wanted to see what, I wasn't the only reason, but I wanted to see what a forest looked like, or what the hurricane looked like when it hit campus. A week after Irma, I was asked by Mike Grunwald to meet him out on Cape Coral. So I don't know if you know Mike's work. He wrote the book, The Swamp, The Everglades, Florida, and the Politics of Paradise. And he was working on an article for Politico magazine. So I'm going to quote from Mike's article that he ultimately wrote in Politico. Cape Coral is the ultimate microcosm of Florida. It's literally a peninsula jutting off the peninsula, the least natural, worst planned, craziest growing piece of an unnatural, badly planned, crazy growing state. Man has sculpted it into an almost comically artificial landscape. He's a good writer. It really captured the essence of Florida, a precarious civilization engineered out of a watery wilderness, a bewildering dreamscape forged by greed, flim-flam, and absurdly grandiose visions that somehow stumbled into a heavily populated reality. Sure, the creation of paradise required the annihilation of nature, but Gulf America's ads touted this improvement of wetlands as the essence of America's can-do spirit. Hang on though. Just when you think we're on the same page, I'm going to change the story because I'm not in that article. Mike didn't appreciate what I had to say. He makes the case that Cape Coral is not sustainable, that we've ruined it, and it never should have been developed. So I've been in Florida for 20 years when Irma hit, and I'd come to the conclusion that stopping growth was not a viable option. To misquote in Field of Dreams, If you don't build it, they will still come. And I think it's honest to say that for some people in Cape Coral is heaven on earth. If a beaver builds a pond, flooding a valley, and destroying the homes of plants and animals that have lived along the stream, we think that's natural. But humans digging canals for Cape Coral, that's unnatural. That's an anthropogenic disturbance. That's a disaster. So for me, here are some critical questions. Is heaven a human construct? Can a city be heaven? Can humans construct heaven on earth? After developing Cape Coral, the Gulf America Corporation moved south to Collier County to an even bigger development of 80,000 acres to be called Golden Gate Estates. The same plan, canals, roads, lots for sale. Northern Golden Gate was developed, and you can go down there now, but southern Golden Gate, the larger part of it, south of I-75, had only a few houses built before Gulf America went bankrupt. Someone, and I can't find out who, had the idea, we could buy it back. And we did. And someone else, I think, named it the Picayune Strand State Forest in 1995. So, when you go home tonight, Google definition of Picayune. You're going to find that it's defined as petty or worthless. And that's wrong. So we not only bought it back, but decided to put it back. Starting in 2005, they began digging up the roads and filling in the canals, restoring the sheet flow back to the landscape. I've had 3 graduate students complete their master's theses on that restoration project, one working on frogs, one working on fish, and one most recently combining the frogs and fish with the plants to try to evaluate the restoration project. Those of us who study the house look for these subtle signs of success and the messages that emerge from this noisy landscape that we live on. The restoration's proceeding. We're back at monitoring it again this year. So we were in the midst of our first round of sampling when Joel contacted me about telling a story. This year we're looking at aquatic insects as the canary in the coal mine. And because my graduate student Tiffany famously and now unforgettably said, mayflies are riveting. So we're down there trying to get our 19 sampling sites, some that are restored, some that are unrestored, some that are reference sites in the Panther Refuge in the Fakahatchee. And the water's deep. It's too deep for our truck, it's too deep for our ATV. We borrowed an airboat, it got stuck. You guys don't know how hard you have to work to get an airboat stuck. The only thing that's harder is getting it unstuck after it's stuck. Some of the sites we kayaked or we walked to. You know that saying that you find a job you love and you never have to work a day in your life? Well, that's bullshit. Because any job that you love, that you really care about, things don't always go as planned. Life's often hard. Sometimes literally and metaphorically, the water's too deep. Well, wow. Listen to this wetland ecologist complain about getting wet. I'm reminded of Edward Abbey saying, there's no shortage of water in the desert. The desert has exactly the amount of water a desert needs. And the only problem arises is when you try to put something in the desert that doesn't belong there, like a lawn or a golf course or a city. There is not too much water in the Picayune. There is, finally, again, the right amount of water in the Picayune, what the Picayune needs. Before COVID, I was driving one of those degraded roads with a videographer pitching the story of the Picayune. I really think it would make a great documentary. And in my mind, it all came together. I said to him, look at this dirt road that we're driving on. In any other place in Florida, you could look ahead 20 years and this road would be paved with a Walgreens on one side and a CVS on the other. This dirt road was paved 20 years ago. 20 years from now, it's going to be washed away by the restored sheet flow. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas once wrote that the Everglades were a test if we pass it, we get to keep the planet. And with deepest respect to her, I gotta say she's wrong. Our children will inherit this landscape either way. It's up to us. But still, back to those questions. Is Cape Coral hell and Picayune heaven? Are they, as human constructs, are they both hell? Or is it possible that they're both heaven? Perhaps heaven in South Florida will be finding the balance between homes and roads and shopping and golf for the people who come here, and space for the life that preceded us. And I think maybe the answer I found putting this story together, Joel, thank you. If there's to be a heaven on earth, it will be a conscious, willful act of human agency. I think for me, helping to play a role in that is heaven enough. One of our alumni, Arlo Simmons, once said at an Earth Day celebration, you know, we still live in the Garden of Eden. We just have to replant it. Or in the case of the Picayune, just reflect, which we are. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Win. Another round of applause. I've spoken with Win a couple times, and he never disappoints in any conversation. I think of science as something that has so many facts and things to research, and he's up here telling us that science has so much heart in it. So can we create heaven on earth? Can we create heaven on earth? Thank you, Win. I wanted to get lots of perspectives, lots of different perspectives on this topic. Heaven starts on earth. How can it start on earth? And our next speaker comes from the department I teach in. Yay! Integrated Studies. Yeah. So the things that fit in the places in between, which I teach a class called Storytelling as Healing, bringing storytelling in and bringing healing together and saying, oh. I think of this topic as just a beautiful place of intersection. So the Department of Integrated Studies is a perfect place to get someone to speak on it. Now our next storyteller speaker, one of her classes is in this new curriculum called Roots of Compassion and Kindness. R-O-C-K, rock. What a great name, what a great name. Everything that has a good name survives. Rock will survive. I spoke with Andrea Fortin, Professor Andrea Fortin, about empathy, compassion, and kindness. She says, I've been studying this in everything I do. It's been in everything I do. And strangely, she comes from a background of communication. Her PhD is in communication, and she got her bachelor's right here at FGCU in communication. Now, how does communication get you to empathy, compassion, kindness? Well, she'll let you know how she integrated it all. Please help me welcome Professor Andrea Fortin.
Well, we'll do our best with this. No, it's good. Perfect. Thank you so much. Imagine you are in the Dean's conference room atop the floor of Seidler Hall. Panoramic windows, massive conference table, actually ergonomic chairs. And your colleagues and you are meeting with an assistant dean to discuss potential project and partnerships. And then your boss walks in. And near the end of the meeting, she is holding a brilliant golden yellow sunflower. She's wearing a mask, but you can see just how brightly she smiles with her eyes. And she hugs each of your colleagues and you and walks out and wishes you well before leaving. And everyone acts as though this was nothing out of the norm, because it is not. This was my experience the other week with Maria Rocca sitting over there, my boss, and I believe this is how heaven starts on earth. When kindness and joy become the norm in the workplace, when we care more about each other, it helps us care even more deeply about our work and creates a place where we want to be. As Dr. Joel said, I'm a part of ROC, an incredible initiative. And through ROC, we help people understand the ways we can apply theories of kindness, compassion, and empathy in our lives. And we do this from an interdisciplinary perspective, bringing in ideas of science, spirituality, psychology, philosophy, communication, business, and more. And we do outreach in the community as well. And as an academic, I have studied human behavior and how our interactions shape our world for more than a decade now. And let me tell you, while theories can be extraordinarily complicated, one thing I can say with certainty and with clarity is that we need empathy, kindness, and compassion. It's essential for our future as a human race. While most people would generally agree that, kindness is a good thing, and, really our department, our initiative is not asking you to simply just hold the door and smile. Don't get me wrong, those are beautiful, wonderful things, and we should do them. Those are welcomed. However, we are seeking to help people embrace a lifestyle of kindness, empathy, and compassion, which is a great effort. It's a sincere and sometimes difficult journey of making changes with how you engage with other people. And as Houston Kraft says, deep kindness requires resilience, courage, and forgiveness. So I believe it is through being kind, compassionate, and empathetic for ourselves and others that we can truly experience heaven on earth. So today, I want to share a concept which might help each of you on your own journeys. And this concept is about living in the present moment. Before we engage in a little activity where we will story tell together silently, don't worry, no audience participation. I'm going to talk to you about phenomenology. Phenomenology. Shout out to FGCU's philosophy department for introducing that to me a long time ago. But it studies how we live in the world, our lived experiences. And this philosophy examines how human beings are time itself. This means that time only really has relevance to us, our perspectives, our experiences. So a boiled down key element of this philosophy is that we are always drawing from the past to move forward into the future. So we're always in that movement. So if you think about it from this perspective, there is no past or future, there is only the present. And we can usually be worried about the past, right? So thinking about, I shouldn't have said that. Or thinking about the future, I wonder what will happen tomorrow. And when we're always worried about the past or thinking about the future, we totally miss out on experiencing the present moment. And so let's practice that together. How can we be in the present moment? I keep saying this thing, what does it mean? So I'm going to help you experience it. I think storytelling is always collaborative. Even if it's on a page and someone reads it, they're engaging with it in their minds. So we're going to storytell together, quietly, like I promised. So I don't want you to worry about doing it wrong. There's no perfect way. The wrong way is to not do it at all, okay? So I invite all of you, including my lovely Zoom folks, some of which are my family, shout out. I want you all to be here now in this moment. I think we can experience how heaven starts on earth together just by being aware of where we are now. It starts with noticing yourself and others, your surroundings. Become aware of your own body in this space. How are you sitting? You need to roll those shoulders back. You need to stretch it out. You've been sitting for like 45 minutes. How's your posture? Is your seat comfortable? How is your breathing? Can you slow down your breathing? Will you follow me as I ask you to breathe in on a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How did that feel? What's the temperature like? Are you cold? Are you warm? Are you just right? Who is sitting around you? Are there empty chairs? Zoom folks, where are you right now? Look at those surroundings. Look at this space all around us. Look at this art that has informed these stories today, the quote that started us off, the sky is above and the earth is below, and we are in between, we are in the now. Hear my voice echoing in here and through the reverberations of the internet. How does it sound to you? It will be different from how I hear it in my own head, how my fellow storytellers hear it, how each of you sitting in different positions in the room hear it. Each of you are experiencing my voice differently due to your position in the room, hearing ability, and how much you're paying attention. And notice how we are all having a moment together, but at the same time, very uniquely experiencing that moment. What does the room smell like? Through the masks. Perfumes, art, cleaning chemicals, nothing at all. Can you smell yourself? If you feel thoughts of to-do lists rushing in or worries about what food they might have at the reception, I'm curious too. Just let these thoughts float away and bring yourself to right now. Let go of what happened before, what's going to happen after, and focus on everything that is right now. Take it all in and notice something else I did not ask you to notice. And when you take this practice away from this event, which I hope you do, see what it does for you to be mindful about how your body moves through the world and what things you notice about other people, about your surroundings, and about yourself. Let it open up empathy for yourself and others. Let it allow you to notice you're slouching to one side when you're on your phone for long periods of time, and that's why you have a sore shoulder. So you can remedy that pain with a very simple change. Let it allow you to seek kind acts. If you see someone in the grocery store parking lot struggling, and you can lend help by lifting heavy groceries in their car if you are capable. Let it allow you to notice that little micro expression of a loved one so you can ask them, is everything okay? And let it allow you to truly listen to them if they choose to honor you with their truth. Let it allow you to seek peace instead of an argument when you can be aware enough to notice that the other person, maybe your enemy, is also suffering. Let it allow you to notice, appreciate, and acknowledge the small, mundane acts of love performed every day by a parent, partner, relative, or friend. And let it allow you to tell yourself that you are already enough exactly as you are. Buddha said, be where you are, otherwise you will miss your life. And I say, if you aren't paying attention, you could miss out on experiencing heaven on earth, which can be witnessed in something as small as a smile, a nod, a subtle acknowledgement, a connection, a hug, a letter, or even a moment of peace when you just let your thoughts focus on the here and now. So I simply invite you to embrace your life now and every moment thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I always am grateful when anyone brings me back into the moment and reminds me of the power of the breath. It's the only thing that's right here, right now. It also reminds me of another piece of kindness, some gratitude. I want to thank the Seidler Foundation for their financial support of this event, the food, and I'm sure you'll be very grateful to them. So Another round of applause for Professor Andrea. Yes, mindfulness. How can we create heaven on earth? Perhaps it's only with our kindness. Perhaps we are living on heaven. I remember I spoke with my Tai Chi teacher once. We're talking about philosophy, and he said, Taoists believe in right here, right now, we can create heaven. Heaven can be right here. And he says that he has this good news, bad news thing for people. He says, when you tell people that, I have news for you, the good news or the bad news, well, maybe they're both good news. But the good news is that you're going to heaven. The other good news is that you're going right now. But if it's right here, it's Well, I wanted to get a diversity of outlooks on this theme of heaven starts on earth, and one of the outlooks that most fascinated me was, what would the School of Business say? What would the College of Business say? So, next we have Professor Eric Dent, who's the Uncommon Friends Endowed Chair Professor of Ethics. He tells me that's a whole story in itself. Look that up, the Uncommon Friends. It's quite a fascinating story. He's in the Department of Management, the Lutgert College of Business, and he's done many things. I was fascinated because he started out at IBM with computer science, went into management, and then went even further and took his career in many different places. I'm always fascinated how you get from here to there. But right now, where is he? He's right here, the Professor of Ethics. I love that he also talks about workplace spirituality, and I'm curious how heaven starts on earth. Please help me welcome Professor Eric Dent.
I spend more of my life working than doing anything else. Maybe you do too. Now, if I were living in the times of the ancient Greeks or Romans and said that, the elite would look at me scornfully because they strove to have as much leisure as possible, and they thought that only the lower class people should engage in work. But then Christianity came along, and Christianity changed everything. In fact, it gave us the popularization of the expression heaven on earth. It also gave us the idea that human beings are actually created in the image of God. And God is many things, but one of them is that he is a creator. So the elite of societies today can stand up proudly and say that I work, I create, and that I enjoy working. I want my work to change the world. I started off with a bachelor's and master's degree in the arts and sciences, and then went off into a career. And about halfway through that career, I decided to go back to school and get a PhD in business. Why in business, you might ask? Well, one reason I've already given you. I spend more time working than doing anything else. And so I am motivated to make the workplace be as positive as it possibly can be. Wouldn't it be nice if the workplace was a slice of heaven here on earth? But the second reason I went back into the business school was that in the late 1990s, I had already concluded that if I wanted to change the world, which institution should I be part of? The big ones that have been world changers have been national governments, the church, NGOs, and businesses. And I concluded in the late 1990s that companies like Coca-Cola and IBM were greater levers of societal change than national governments were. Occasionally I'd have somebody argue with me about that then, not often though. But today, I don't think anyone will argue with me that Facebook, Google, or the NBA are greater levers of societal change in the world than any of those other institutions. So let's talk first about heaven on earth in the workplace. So what we teach in the School of Business, we really encourage our students all to live virtuous lives, which partly includes having voluntary, value-added, long-term, I-thou relationships with everyone they encounter. So let me unpack that for just a second. Voluntary is probably the easiest one. If we're going to contribute to the world, it has to come out of our gifting. It has to come out of our calling, right? It can't be coerced by anyone, so it has to be voluntary. Secondly, it has to be value added. In the vernacular, we use the expression win-win. So each one of us naturally and instinctively goes through our lives knowing what a win for us is in every encounter we have. We don't even have to think about that. But what I've really tried to focus on in the last 10 years of my life is what is the win for the other person that I'm in relationship with or that I'm in interaction with. So if a student comes into my office, I think about what is a win for her and often explicitly ask, what is a win for you? Those of us who are faculty, when we talk with our department chairs, it's usually because we want something. We want travel money, or we want to influence her in some particular way. But I really think deeply about what's a win for my department chair when I interact with her. Monday's my 35th anniversary. So on the ride home tonight, I'm going to ask my wife very clearly and specifically, what will be a win for you as we celebrate that really important milestone. The win-win relationships, though, if they're going to be the most virtuous, have to be long-term win-win, not short-term. Probably the clearest way to illustrate that is if you're a parent. If you want to, you can put your kid in front of a screen for a long period of time. The kid will think it's a win, and you might think it's a short-term win because you get a little free time to do something. It's not a good long-term win-win relationship. And even in other contexts, it's difficult perhaps to be friends with someone if you know they're starting to abuse alcohol or any kinds of behaviors, they're not being kind. Then we have to not look for short-term wins, but long-term win-win relationships with people. And then finally, I-thou relationships. This is the terminology that Martin Buber popularized to describe relationships that are personal and often even intimate, rather than using people objectively or instrumentally. So what we teach is to live virtuous lives marked by voluntary, value-added, long-term, I-thou interactions and relationships with other people. So let me talk about the second point, which was how businesses can change society. The common umbrella that we use for that activity is corporate social responsibility, or CSR. We teach corporate social responsibility in the business school. In fact, we teach using the very same model that comes up in the colloquium class on sustainability. In the business school, we usually call it the triple bottom line, but basically it's a measure of people, place, and profits. That's what businesses are being assessed on today. And we really expect businesses to do things like make charitable contributions and to be good environmental stewards. So let me give you an example of one organization and a corporate social responsibility initiative that it launched in 2013. And it's one that maybe everyone in this room has participated in. It was done by the Amazon Corporation, and it's called Amazon Smile. So if you make a purchase on the Amazon website and you do it through the Smile link, Amazon will take a portion of those proceeds from that purchase and contribute them to charity. Since 2013, when that program was launched, Amazon has contributed over $200 million to charities. Right? So bravo for Amazon. Now what if I also told you that over a multi-year period, Amazon has taken $3 billion from society. And how does this happen? So the research that I do is all evidence-based, and most of it counters the prevailing notion. You know, I get interested in a subject, there's a prevailing notion, and I think, that doesn't sound right to me. Let me see if the evidence supports it. So what I'm about to share with you is not the way that people commonly think about corporate social responsibility. But if you followed the news just a couple of years back, Amazon had a very public request for proposal that they put out to invite communities to compete for the location of their second headquarters. HQ2 was the nickname for this. Now, any community could apply. There were a lot of requirements, though. You had to have over 1 million people in your metropolitan statistical area. You had to have a lot of infrastructure in place, like a subway system pretty much was required in order to be in the game. You had to have a lot of Starbucks around. Really, seriously. And there were many other requirements. But perhaps one of the most important requirements was Amazon wanted to know how much you would pay them to locate about 50,000 jobs for their second headquarters there. And the initial winning bid was New York City. And New York City, New York State, and a couple other entities patched together about $3 billion that they would pay to the Amazon Corporation to locate that second headquarters there. It was about $48,000 per job that they would move for the second headquarters. So my conclusion is that the foremost and primary responsibility that any business owes to society is to fund its own ongoing operations. $200 million is great. $3 billion, even at this hour I can do the math, that's about 15 times what they've taken as opposed to what they are giving back in terms of corporate social responsibility. Now, it doesn't have to be that way, and I'm not trying to pick on Amazon because they're not the only ones who do this. This is a widespread practice. And we participate in that because we're part of communities that are often trying to put together as much money as possible to recruit businesses, right? Taxpayers or New York City, when they found out they won, were thrilled that they could pay $3 billion to have this location, be their Amazon second headquarters. But it doesn't have to be that way. So let me give you an example that's different. Let me ask you by show of hands, how many people have ever been to San Jose, California, Boulder, Colorado, Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, and here we'll probably get everybody, my hometown, Boca Raton, Florida. All right. So each of those, if you've been to any of them, they're very desirable places to live. They're considered to be premier communities for people to live and work. That hasn't always been true at all. In fact, most of them were not even on the map a few years back, Research Triangle Park, in fact, was woods. It was literally woods between Raleigh and Durham. But a company came into each of those locations. Anyone have an idea what company that was?
It's tobacco in Raleigh, Durham.
Boca Raton, Boulder, San Jose,
Oh,
same company.
Same company.
You know. IBM. Right, so IBM went to San Jose, California when there really was no San Jose, California. When there really was no Boca Raton, Florida. Boca was just a little tiny location. Research Triangle Park literally was woods. And what they said was, we will build, not explicitly, but we will build excellence here. We will do this for society. Boca Raton ended up having about 20,000 jobs. Amazon was going to get 50,000 jobs. The equivalent would have been about $1.2 billion. Could you imagine Boca Raton and the state of Florida saying, yeah, we'll pay you $1.2 billion to bring 20,000 jobs to Boca Raton, Florida? No, IBM didn't ask for anything. So it's possible for corporations to be socially responsible just by what they're willing to give, what they're willing to build. What I also really didn't like about the Amazon approach was They really required a lot of infrastructure to already be in place. So they wanted a community that had already spent the money to build a subway system. They wanted to ride it, but they didn't want to be the ones that contributed to the initial construction of it, right? So my primary challenge when I speak to businesses is your first and foremost responsibility, if you really are socially responsible, is to fund your own ongoing operations. And my challenge for each of us, back to the first point, is to continue to live virtuous lives and to engage in voluntary, value-added, long-term, I-thou relationships with everybody that you encounter.
Thank you. Professor Eric Dent. I like that line that you said in there. I like many of them, but I want my work to change the world. I want my work to change the world. And I've heard that from everyone here. So, but you said it out loud, so thank you for saying it. And something I never thought about. Most of our time is spent in the workplace. How can we make that heaven? Thank you. Well, I wanted to switch up our, by the way, we get a little bit of Q&A at the end, so I hope you're writing your questions down or making mental notes. But I wanted to take us back into biology for our next storyteller speaker. Now, Professor Christina Anaya came to an open mic the other day. She came to two of them, actually, thank you. And she told a story out here. And afterwards I said, what do you know about Heaven Starts on Earth? That's how I got it. Well, she has a way of bringing science alive in her stories. And I'm excited to hear what she has to say. You can read all about her, but my favorite thing is that she works on something called, colloquially, zombie parasites. Zombie parasites. Now, at first I was afraid, I'm a physician, but she says they do not infect people, the ones that she works on, so FGCU is safe. But she's been working on this, and she has a brilliant story of how she got to this, but what I love is that it took her to so many beautiful places. And first of those, she said, was Oklahoma. She got her degree. But then it took her to Iceland, which she says is one of her favorite places that she wants to go back to. And then it took her to another wonderful place, right here in Florida. So please help me welcome to our stage, Professor Christina Anaya from Biology, Zombie Parasites.
I've been in this room more than anybody else in the room in the past 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, heaven is described as a paradise, a high place, a holy place, where earthly beings can find peace. For a taxonomist, or a biologist such as myself, who groups organisms into categories, Earth and all its species are heaven for me, because it's where I find peace. There are approximately 1.2 million viruses, bacteria, plants, animals, fungi, and parasites that have been described formally. However, our current most accurate estimates suggest there are 8.7 million, give or take a million, species. So that means we've only discovered about 14% of all the species in the world and only 9% of the world's ocean species. But the methods they use to get those accurate numbers are actually mathematical models based on mammals, birds, and vertebrates, which are the largest animals on the planet. The same rules don't apply when you look at the smaller organisms or when you're estimating them. So for example, insects are estimated to be about 80 to 30 million species on the planet, and we've only described 1 million, which is 1 million of those 1.2 million species. If you take an acre of soil 5 inches deep out of North Carolina, There are 124 million animals, 90 million mites, and 28 million springtails, and 4.5 million other insects. In Pennsylvania, in the same acre, there's 425 million insects, with mites and springtails again being the most numerous. Are we so vain to think that we know all of the species that are in there? We don't. Recently, in urban biodiversity in the backyards of Los Angeles, specifically looking for flies in the genus Megacillia. And despite its name, the fly is actually quite small. It's about 2 to 3 millimeters. And if you compare that to a housefly, they're about 5 to 7 millimeters long. Well, they collected 56 species in the first 3 months of the survey. 30 of them were new to science in Los Angeles backyards. Which goes to show you that if you seek, you will find. This is heaven for a taxonomist. Now, this was a survey for one genus of fly, so imagine what we would find if we intentionally went out and looked for all these different genera of organisms. I'm a parasitologist. I study some of the most vile organisms on the planet, to most people at least, but I happen to think that parasites are quite lovely. But guess what? Parasites are one of the most abundant organisms on the planet, and one of the most understudied, for that matter. Every living being on the planet has at least one parasite on or inside them, and most animals have about 2 or 3 living on or inside of them. So if there's 1.2 million species, and all of them have at least one parasite that it is placed host to, well then that's a lot of parasites. But if there are actually an estimated 8.7 million species, give or take a million, how many parasites are there? The conservative estimates say there's 6 million parasites on the planet, and the more liberal number is more than 100 million. So unfortunately, there aren't enough taxonomists to go out and find these species, and there's no way to quantify, even in addition, the number of parasitic bacteria and viruses. We have no idea. So I want to go back. Everything on the planet has a parasite. You yourself right now may have parasitic mites in your eyelashes. So at night when you go to bed and close your eyes, those mites crawl out of your hair follicles and they start roaming around, and they're looking for mates. And when they find a mate, they have sex all over your eyelids. And then, before you wake up in the morning, go rip out all your Before you wake up in the morning, their long cylindrical body allows them to fit in nice and snuggled inside your hair follicle, hugging your eyelash hairs with all of the other little mites together. But actually, so I'm going to go off cuff. Parasites are actually integral to many ecosystems. This is an ode to Win. So many ecosystems have these really complicated food webs where we look at the primary producers at the bottom, like the grasses, who are the most numerous. And then we have the herbivores in the middle, and then at the top we have these apex predators, the carnivores. And Win and I have talked about this. There are now ecologists and parasitologists starting to meet each other halfway. They've always been really separate. There's parasite ecologists, and then there's ecologists. And we're all starting to realize we need to work together. Because when you take those food webs and you do the models and you add parasites, 40 to 50% of the organisms are parasites. And they actually form this like outer layer around the food web. And if you pull one of them out, you pull the whole thing apart. And I was sitting there and I realized I made my students watch a video this past week called The Queen of Trees. It's about a tree in Kenya. It's a ficus tree. And there's this intimate relationship. The figs are hanging on the tree, and inside the figs, and if you ever really looked at a fig, the flowers of this tree are on the inside of the fig. And all of the little flowers inside what we know as a fig is actually the flowers inside become the fruit, not the figs, not the fruit. And so there's fig wasps that are very closely connected with this fig tree. And these female figs come flying from miles away, and they're in a hurry because they're carrying nematode parasites inside of them. And they're about to lose all of their energy, but they're also loaded with eggs, and they gotta deposit them. So they make their way into this tiny opening in the fig, and they go inside and they lay their eggs in the flowers inside, which form little galls, little protective coverings for their eggs. And then along comes this parasitic wasp, who can't fit like the little fig wasps do, but those parasitic wasps have this really long ovipositor out of their back, like the stinger. It's a modified stinger, or the stinger is the modified ovipositor. So she sticks it goes over her head and in, and she can probe inside that fig and look for the fig wasp's eggs, and then she lays her eggs on the fig wasp's eggs and takes over that egg. Meanwhile, it takes a full 2 months for this life cycle to happen. So all of the eggs hatch and all the little fig wasps come out. The fig wasps, females and males, and the parasitic wasp eggs also hatch. Well, the males of the fig wasp, the one that's really nice to the fig tree, they don't fly. They don't have any wings, but they have these huge jaws. So all of their energy over evolutionary time has been invested in these jaws. And these jaws are needed to get the fig wasp females out of the fig. So the females are waiting for the males to chomp through that fig and make an opening, and then the female fig wasps can escape, as well as the parasitic wasps. But meanwhile, when the females first laid her eggs, she was carrying all those nematodes, and she dies inside after she lays her eggs. But the nematodes are alive, and the nematodes get into the eggs of the developing fig wasps. So then when those fig wasps hatch and they left after the males bit open the fig, they're carrying nematodes, and they gotta get to the next tree in a hurry to go lay their eggs. So this fig tree actually produces figs 6 times per year, 2 months for these life cycles to occur. Fig wasps flying back and forth. Meanwhile though, the whole tree is being used by elephants, giraffes, monkeys, cicadas. All of these different insects are benefiting from this tree. If you even pulled out those little nematodes, there wouldn't be any evolutionary pressure to keep flying to the next tree in a hurry and lay your eggs and hurry and go. So it's a delicate web, these food webs, that if you pull out a parasite, the whole thing collapses. That's how important they are. But I digress. So I found my first parasite about 10 years ago. I was in my backyard smoking a cigarette, very shamefully, hiding from my son who was inside playing video games, and I knew he wasn't going to be distracted. So I was a former smoker, but had picked it up every couple years. I'd smoke for a week or two. So I was out there embarrassed of myself in the rain, and I was in the first years of my master's program. And it was pouring rain, and the water was accumulating in the planter, and there were jasmine vines underwater, and one of them seemed to be swimming, very snake-like. So I picked it up because I'm a biologist and I was curious, and it seemed to be reacting to me, and I had no idea what it was. So when I finished my cigarette, I Googled spaghetti-like worm. It was about 1 foot long, it was brown and thin. And so these hits kept coming up that said this is a parasite called a hairworm. And there was a researcher in New Mexico who said, if you find these worms, please send them. I'm doing a biodiversity study looking at hairworms across North America. So I did, in the interest of science. And he called me a month later and he said, this is a new species. And, would you like to name it? And would you like to study these hairworms? I'm always looking for grad students. And I passed. I had some other endeavors. But then a month later, I found that my other endeavors weren't working. So I just started looking at hairworms and studying them, and asked the parasitologist if I could be her student. She said yes. And I learned all about these hairworms. So being outside that one particular day, smoking a cigarette, which made me find a worm, which led me to almost complete my master's, but led me to my PhD. I found my second new species during the first semester of my PhD when I moved to Oklahoma State University. So in all the 4 years prior, I'd been looking for these hairworms, and I found 5 in 4 years. That's not a lot. They're really rare to find. But then the first semester I was there, it was early November, I was walking my dogs as I normally do. It had been raining, And these hairworms actually live in the water. They live in ponds and streams and lakes, and that's where you go find them, and they're really hard to find. But here I am in Oklahoma, first time I'd ever left California, and I'm walking the dogs after a rain, and there's hairworms everywhere, popping out of the soil, popping out of the grass, all over the sidewalk, all over the street by the hundreds. I mean, you could pick them up in these huge wads, even coming through the cracks of the asphalt. And I went back to my advisor and I said, look at this. He says, yeah, we heard about them in the grass, but I haven't had time. And that's how I decided that would be my project. And it was a new species, so I described that new species. But I continued to learn new methods and keep learning about parasites, but I was also learning a lot about myself and what I was capable of. So when I saw a flyer to attend the last Fulbright meeting of the semester, I said, why not? And then I thought, where would I go? I remember I saw a movie about Iceland. It was nice there. Maybe I'll go there. Even though I didn't even ever have a passport and I'd never been out of the country. I'd been to Tijuana because I'm from San Diego, so you just walk across the border. So I received the Fulbright, and I went to look for hairworms in Iceland. And I discovered that Iceland was pretty much heaven for me when I saw incredible landscapes, parasites, and made some of the best friends I've ever had. And while I didn't find new species of hairworms, I did find hairworms that no one had ever described from there before, and I made some important discoveries about their life cycle and how they move through the system. That's now published. But while I was on vacation this past summer, while looking for hairworms, before I came to FGCU, I came across some flies on my hairworm traps. And there on my traps were these flies that were hanging by their proboscis, which is their mouth parts. And they were dead, and they were just hanging. And I instantly knew what this was, because I studied parasites. It's a parasitic fungus. And I was familiar with this fungus called Ophiocordyceps, is the genus in the rainforests around the world. And Ophiocordyceps infects ants, and it migrates to the ant's brain and controls it, and it makes the ant climb up a tree, go out to a branch, latch onto a leaf by its jaws, and then stay there until it eventually starves, and then it dies. And when it dies, the fungus pops out of the head, releasing spores to go hit all the other ants on the forest floor. So when I saw these flies hanging, and one of them had fungus coming out, I knew instantly. So I brought him back to the US with me. I didn't tell anybody either. I snuck him in my makeup bag. But when I did some research, I figured out that there's no fungus in flies described in Iceland. There is one, we call them entomophagous fungus, insect-loving fungi. There's one that infects an aphid that a grad student was working on in Iceland. But as far as the flies, there's not. And usually they are very host-specific. So it will probably be a new species. So now I'm here at FGCU. This is my first semester. My students and I will be traveling to Iceland this summer. And we're going to collect more flies, legally, look at the fungus, and hopefully hairworms, and who knows what other species we'll find. The Earth is a temple for species, and with so many waiting to be discovered, heaven starts on Earth.
Thank you, Christina Anaya, Professor Christina Anaya. I love that the heaven starts on earth for the biologist and taxonomist is the variety, this infinite web of variety in the ecosystems of food and give or take a million. There's so much diversity in the biodiversity, and it made me think to ask each of you, you're all in different places. The idea is that everyone's studying something different. Everybody is something else. Like, how do you make heaven upon earth from your perspective, from the place where you work? I just want to give you a little space for that. How do you make heaven on earth? You've heard from 4 folks here who told us how they make heaven on earth, and I hope it stimulates ideas for you. I want to bring them up on stage just to thank them, give them an applause, and then we're going to go out and eat. You can ask them questions there. Please help me welcome Professor Win Everham, Professor Andrea Fortin, Professor Eric Dent, and Professor Christina Anaya. Look at them, remember their faces, ask them lots of questions, and enjoy the food outside. And if you could help me do one more thing before you get up, pick up your chairs and we just need to stack them in the back. Thank you all so much for coming. Now Heaven starts on. I also do want to say, I just want to thank them so much for agreeing to come and do these stories. They called me and they stressed about all the work that they had to do and what do I have to do, and they did it. And they got up here and they were amazing, so thank you.
I will have 9 minutes.